Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing 25 of my favorite fantasy romance authors that I am hoping to meet at Apollycon, as well as my favorite book by each author. Alright guys, so Becky, the queen of collaborations, reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in doing a fantasy romance rec video where we talked about all of the authors we are so excited to meet at Apollycon, and I figured I would talk about each book that I really enjoy by each author. So after you are finished watching this video, please check out Lisa and Becky's videos. I will have them linked down in the description below. But I figured this would serve as a really good fantasy romance rec video and just talk about all of my favorite fantasy romance books. So if you are unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these fantasy romance authors. Alright guys, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with Apollycon, it is a book signing event that is put together by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and it is mostly fantasy romance authors. Now there are some contemporary and dark romance authors that are going to be there, so if you guys want a part 2 to this video, let me know down in the comments below, and I will do one for just the contemporary and dark romance authors that I'm really hoping that I get to meet. So it's taking place at the end of April in Washington, D.C., so it's somewhat near my house, and this is going to be the biggest signing event I've ever been to. So I am so nervous, but so excited. So anyway, this is going to be in alphabetical order, except for the first author, and that is Jennifer L. Armentrout herself. So From Blood and Ash is one of my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. I loved that book. So I typically don't read books physically. I mostly listen to the audio version, but when From Blood and Ash first came out, there wasn't an audio, and I actually binged that entire book in 2 days, which is so rare for me. So if you're unfamiliar with the plot of the first book in the From Blood and Ash series, we are following Poppy. She has been raised in isolation, and she is getting ready for this ritual that is known as the Ascension. Now, we don't know exactly what the Ascension is, we just know that it's very, very daunting. So one day, Poppy decides she wants to live a little bit, and she sneaks out in disguise and ends up going to the Red Pearl, which is like this bar, but also some like steamy stuff ends up happening there. And when she gets there, she runs into Hawk, who is the newest member of the Rise Guard. And after that, Hawk ends up becoming her personal guard, and it is their romance, and it is so good. So it has vampires, it has werewolves, and it's just one of my absolute favorites. Now, I will say, the most recent books I haven't been a huge fan of. Honestly, A Fire in the Flesh, I have DNF'd twice. I really do want to finish it soon, but overall I just feel like J-Law's pushing out these books very, very fast, and I feel like they can use just a little bit more editing, but overall I still love this series and the prequel series. So I'm hoping I can meet Jennifer L. Armentrout while I'm there. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but that would be so unbelievably exciting. And next up, we have Harper L. Woods. Now, you are probably somewhat confused because I said I was doing this in alphabetical order. However, Harper L. Woods also writes under Adelaide Forrest, so that is why they are next. But What Lies Beyond the Veil is one of my absolute favorite fantasy romance series by Harper L. Woods. I also really enjoyed The Coven. However, I haven't read the second book in that duology. But this is following a girl that lives in this very patriarchal community, and there is a veil that separates the humans from the Fae that are considered very dangerous. Well, to keep this veil up and running, the humans in this community have to sacrifice a person, and our main character is the one that is picked to be sacrificed. Now, right before she is about to be sacrificed, the veil ends up rupturing, and all of the Fae come spilling out and start marking the humans as their property. So the story kind of goes from there. Our main character ends up going on the run with someone else she meets who is also running from the Fae, and they are both marked, so they are considered super dangerous because the Fae are obviously looking for them, and the humans don't want the Fae coming around. So overall, I really enjoyed this series. I will say I love book 1, I love book 2. Book 3 is pretty dark, and most of it is just torture, so I actually ended up DNFing book 3, but I want to go back and finish it because overall I was enjoying it. It was really dark, and I wasn't expecting it to be quite so dark. But overall, I really enjoy Harper L. Woods' writing, and I'm really hoping I can meet them at Apollycon. And next up is Adeline Grace, and my favorite book by far is Belladonna. Now, I will say Adeline Grace has wrote a few YA fantasy books that I've really enjoyed. Her writing is very, very atmospheric, and you really feel immersed as you're reading. But Belladonna is by far my favorite. It has all the gothic vibes. We're following this girl named Signa Faro. And when she is a baby, her mother ends up taking her to this party where everybody ends up dying, and then death shows up in corporeal form, ready to usher the souls to the afterlife. And when he goes to take baby Signa's soul, he realizes that for some reason he can't. So he becomes very intrigued by her and kind of follows her as she's growing up and is passed around from different guardians. Now, the entire town thinks Sigma Faro might actually be cursed because, one, her guardians seem to be dying randomly, and also she can't die. So eventually Signa ends up being shipped off to these guardians across the country, and when she gets there, she finds out that there is a mystery that she has to solve, and there are these ghosts, and it is just so, so good. So like I said, love this first book. The second book, Foxglove, unfortunately didn't really work for me, only because there was an extra POV added, and I just felt like it kind of slowed down the story. I just didn't really care about them as much as I cared about these characters. So that was a little bit of a letdown, but I'm still going to read Wisteria, which is the third book in the series, when it releases. And next up is Amber Nicole, and she is the author of the Book of Azrael. I adore this fantasy romance. It is unlike any other fantasy romance I've read before. We're following almost a post-apocalyptic world where the gods have almost, not left, but the gods are kind of sleeping in like a different realm. So demons have really kind of taken control. And our main character is named Diana, and her sister ends up being mortally wounded, and she ends up praying that someone will come and help. Well, a demon shows up and is like, hey, I can save your sister, but in doing so, I'm also gonna give you a mortal life, but you're gonna have to be my like monster assassin and do everything I say for the rest of your life. And Diana reluctantly agrees. So then we jump into the future, and this demon is like, hey, Diana, I need you to go find the Book of Azrael. And while Diana is trying to find it, she accidentally awakens a god who shows up on this realm and says, hey, I am going to capture you, and both of us are going to find this book together. And it is a romance between them, but it was so good, and the ending of this is a crazy cliffhanger. So at the time I read this, the second book wasn't available via audio. However, it has recently released. So I will definitely be reading the second book very, very soon, and I really hope I can meet Amber Nicole. All right, so this next author is at the top of my list. I have no idea if I'll actually be able to meet her because I know she is going to be one of the most sought after like wristbands, but I will fangirl so hard. So we have Carissa Broadbent. And I couldn't even pick just one book because there are two books that I adore by her. So the first one is Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. This is set in the same world as the Crown of Nyaxia series, but I think I actually like this more than Serpent and the Wings of Night. We're following this seer who no longer is able to see with her eyes and instead has to see with these threads of fate, and I just thought that was such a cool dynamic. But she's essentially part of this like seer cult, and this cult wants her to kill the vampire conqueror who has been conquering the lands. And it's a romance between our main character and this vampire conqueror, and I just think it is so unbelievably well done and well paced, and her writing is just phenomenal. So I adored this book, but this book, Six Scorched Roses, is a novella, and it is my favorite novella of all time. So this is following a girl who lives in a community where people are wasting away to dust, and she knows that she is going to die because on top of that, she also has this horrible illness. So before she dies, she wants to find a cure to save her family. And she believes the way to do this is with vampire blood. So she finds this vampire and says that she will give the vampire these magical roses in return for vials of blood. And it is their love story. And I don't know how Carissa Broadbent made this novella feel slow burn, but I was screaming, please kiss already, multiple times while reading this novella. It is just so amazing. So highly, highly recommend. And I really, really hope I get to meet Carissa Broadbent. Like I said, I will absolutely lose my mind. And next up is Carissa Weeks. So she's the author of The Witch Collector. And this is also a very atmospheric story. I feel like you should definitely read this in the winter, but it's following this girl that lives in a community where witches are taken once every so many years by a witch collector, and brought to the Frost King, and that's kind of like what protects them. So really the people in the community don't get upset about this, except our main character's sister was one of the witches that was taken. So she decides that she is going to be the next witch that is taken to the Frost King. She's going to save her sister and kill the witch collector and the Frost King. And the story goes from there. So overall, I enjoyed this book, mostly just because of the atmospheric writing, but I thought the pacing was a little off. It's mostly a traveling story, and I didn't realize that going in, but I still enjoyed it and plan on continuing with the series, and I'm really hoping I can get this book signed by Carissa Weeks. And this next author, I feel like, is another one that everyone is going to try to see, and I will also probably fangirl and have no idea what to say. Fun fact, I freeze up at signings where I just forget how to speak, so that's always fun. But A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, I just finished this book. It's going to be one of my top reads of 2024. It is a Viking or a Norse-inspired fantasy romance, kind of has enemies to lovers, but the world building in this is exceptional, and it just has all of those Norse mythology vibes, and I'm a huge fan of The Last Kingdom, Ragnarok, Vikings, so everything about this book was perfect. Also, if you were a fan of From Blood and Ash, this was like From Blood and Ash, but add Vikings. So highly, highly recommend. I loved this book, and if I can meet Danielle L. Jensen, I will lose my mind. Also, she wrote The Bridge Kingdom, which is a, I believe, new adult duology that's also enemies to lovers and is also really, really good. So she is one of the authors I am most excited to meet. And next up is actually a newly discovered author for me. So we have Thief of Silver and Souls, and this is by Eva Chase. This is the only book I've read by this author, but I definitely plan on reading more. So this was my first Patreon book club pick, and I am so happy this was the first one because it is a Why Choose Fantasy romance, and I feel like it really started my Patreon off on a good start because a lot of us really enjoyed this book. But this is following a girl that has a secret power, and when she was younger, she accidentally kills her sister. So she spends the rest of her, or not the rest of her life, but as she's growing up, she develops this Robin Hood type mentality where she's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And one day when she goes to help this noble that she sees is dying, she accidentally takes the noble's soul into herself. And the noble says that there is a plot that is happening at this college. Can you please help? Because there's no one alive that can assist. So she ends up doing that, and then she meets these very attractive guys that are also kind of in on this plot, and the story goes from there. So I will say this ends on a crazy cliffhanger, and unfortunately the book, or book 2, isn't available via audio. So I'm really hoping that comes out soon because I really want to know what happens, but I love the cover art for this. I feel like all of Eva Chase's books have gorgeous covers. So I am really hoping I can meet her and get this signed. Also, I don't know if you guys have noticed, I apologize for talking really fast. I am battling such a cold right now, and I can feel myself losing my voice. So I've tried to get through this before my voice is gone, but that is why I'm kind of going rather quickly. But anyway, next up, I really, really want to meet Ivy Asher. I discovered Ivy Asher late last year, and some of her books I am just obsessed with. This book in particular blew me away, and I don't hear enough people talking about it. So please, if you like dark, Why Choose fantasy romance, look no further. This book is so, so good. So this is following a girl named Offset, and at the beginning of her story, she wakes up completely nude in this cage, and she has no memory of who she is or what her name is, and she's taken to this guy who begins to torture her for information. Well, then these assassins show up, kill the guy torturing her, but still leave her chained to the floor, and then they bounce. So Offset ends up being sold to this like assassin guild where she's going to be trained to become an assassin and eventually purchased by one of the assassin groups in the hopes that she can kill enough people to pay for her freedom. And the people that end up buying her are the ones that left her in the beginning of the book. And the story goes from there. So it's essentially Offset trying to find out who she is, why she was kidnapped to begin with, and also dealing with these guys that treat her pretty poorly in the beginning, but then things start to progress. But overall, I read this book in a day and a half, and it is super chunky. But definitely check trigger warnings because this is on the darker side, but overall, I absolutely adored this book. And next up is Jamie Applegate Hunter. So my favorite book, or the only book I've read by this author, is The Ember King. However, I really want to do a reread of this soon and then pick up the second book because it recently was released via audio. And I ended up giving this book, I think, 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. So the beginning of this book reminded me a lot of the Mind F series. We're following this girl that at one point she had a twin, but her twin was murdered and she actually saw the perpetrator. So as our main character is growing up, she realizes that she can see the color of people's souls. So she decides that she is going to kill anyone with a black soul. However, she does wait for them to actually start to commit a crime before she kills them. So I respect that, but that's what kind of reminded me of the Mind F series. So anyway, one day she is captured and taken to essentially court for killing all of these people, and she has to go to the prison realm. And when she gets to the prison realm, she sees the head of the prison realm bears a striking resemblance to the guy that murdered her sister, and the story goes from there. And it was super unique, super fun, and I really, really hope I can meet Jamie Applegate Hunter at Apollycon. As I'm doing this video, I'm realizing that I have not finished a lot of series, and I used to be someone that really prided myself on completely finishing series before I moved on. So yeah, that apparently is a thing that I need to work on in 2024, because next up is Between Wrath and Mercy, which is a book that I gave 5 stars by Jess Wisecup. I am 100% trying to see Jess Wisecup at Apollycon. I adore this book. It is one of the only fantasy romance books I have read that has older, more mature characters, and I just appreciate it so, so much. As someone who is in their mid-30s, I like reading about people my age, and I feel like most of the fantasy romance I read has people that are between 19 and 22. Nothing wrong with that, it's just really nice feeling kind of represented in characters. But anyway, I have not read the second book in the series, and I've owned it for quite some time, so hopefully I will do that before Apollycon. But if you're unfamiliar with Between Wrath and Mercy, we are following this girl that is in a loveless marriage, but luckily she does have a daughter that is her entire world. That is until her daughter is kidnapped, and she ends up having to ask the Bloody Prince Rainier, who she has a history with, to help find her daughter. And the story goes from there, and it is so good and also pretty spicy. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about how much spice is in this, and I guess there's not a lot in terms of quantity, but the quality, it's really good. But anyway, I definitely have to read the second book because this is another book that ends on an insane cliffhanger. And next up, we have J. Bree. So my favorite series by J. Bree is Broken Bonds, and this is a Why Choose paranormal fantasy romance that I binged and was completely obsessed with, and it's still one of my favorite Why Choose series of all time. Now, I will say she also has the Crown of Oaths and Curses series that a lot of my friends have really enjoyed. Unfortunately, there is no audiobook yet for that first book, so I haven't read it besides the novellas. But overall, I love Broken Bonds. I always have a really hard time trying to summarize what it's about. But essentially following this girl that lives in a world where you can have multiple bonded, and these bonded help power you up. So our main character is Oleander, and she is driving with her mother and her mother's 2 bonded. And then there is a car accident and everyone ends up perishing except for Oleander. So Oleander, who actually does know who her future bonded will be, does not end up going back to them and instead ends up fleeing and disappearing. So her bonded are very upset by this, and they spent years trying to track her down. Finally, they eventually find her and they drag her back. So the first book is very much a bully romance, but as the story progresses, we kind of uncover why Oleander felt the need to flee, and there's so much action, and North and Nox Draven are by far my favorite bonds, but overall, I loved all of them, and this is one of the only Why Choose where I feel like enough time is given with every single bond that they all felt very fleshed out, and you will definitely have your favorites. Like I said, North and Nox are mine, followed by Atlas, but overall, I love this series, and I cannot wait to meet J. Bree. Up is KJ Sutton. So I originally, when I first started BookTube, I read the first 3 books in the Fortuna Sworn series, and I was obsessed. It is a dark fantasy romance series. We're following our main character, who is one of the last nightmares, which means when she touches someone, they see their nightmare or what they are afraid of. So her brother ends up going missing, and one day this fae shows up on her door and says, "Hey, I know where your brother is, but if you want answers, you have to marry me." So she ends up agreeing to this marriage and has to go to the Unseelie court, and it goes from there. This is another darker fantasy romance, so check trigger warnings. But I honestly might do a read-along on my Patreon after I finish Throne of Glass, just because I really want to finish this series because I loved those first few books. So let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in. I don't know, because I do. I really love those first few, so I feel like the entire series is probably really, really good. And next up is Karina Halley, and honestly, she has written a lot of books that I absolutely adore, but I think I have to give it to Black Sunshine. It is a vampire witch romance, and it is spectacular. It is one of my absolute favorites. We're following Lenore, who is this girl that has grown up with her parents, and on her birthday, her parents want to take her to this remote cabin. However, before that can happen, she ends up being abducted by Absalon, a vampire, who tells her that, hey, your parents are actually witches, and they wanted to take you to that cabin to murder you, and let's not have that happen. And it's their romance, and it is so good. So highly, highly recommend. If you have not read this yet, the second book, The Blood is Love, is also really good. But I've also read River of Shadows by Karina Halley, and a few other books that I've really enjoyed. So she is one of the top authors I cannot wait to meet. And next up is another author that I feel like deserves so much more love. So we have Lexi C. Foss, and she is the author of the Blood Alliance series, which is a vampire and shifter series. I believe it's a 9-book series, but it's essentially what would happen if shifters and vampires took over the world and humans were used as just food or for like sexual pleasure and things like that. And while all of this is going on, there's also a coup to like take down this government that is happening throughout the books. But I love all of the books in this series. I think I've rated every single one over 4 stars. The only reason I stopped reading is because, once again, the audiobook for the last 2 weren't available. I believe book 9 is actually going to be released very soon, and book 8 is already out. So I will finish the series this year. But like I said, it is one of my favorite vampire shifter series, and every book is super, super spicy. So if that is what you're looking for, definitely check out the Blood Alliance series, and I really hope to meet her at Apollycon. And of course, I would be ecstatic to get a book signed by Rebecca Yarros. Is that gonna happen? Probably not. I feel like she's probably one of the most sought after wristbands at Apollycon, and everyone is gonna be trying to see her. So I've kind of already accepted I probably am not getting a book signed by her, but it would be really cool, and if it does happen, I will be over the moon. So she is the author of Fourth Wing, which I feel like everyone knows what this book is about. It is following Violet Sorrengail, who becomes a dragon rider, goes to this dragon rider university, tries to survive. Some people love this series, some people hate the series. Personally, for me, I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait to continue, but I will completely lose it if I meet Rebecca Yarros, just because I love this book so, so much. So anyway, once again, I've pretty much accepted, probably won't meet her, but if I do, it will be amazing. And this next author, I did not realize was going to be attending Apollycon until I started putting this video together, and I am so excited. So we have Raven Kennedy, who wrote the Plated Prisoner series. I have a full spoiler-free reading vlog of me reading this series. I will leave in the cards and the description. I still haven't read the latest release. I believe her books ended up getting picked up by a different audiobook platform, so it's taking a little while for the newest book to come out. But I love this series. It is one of my favorite fantasy romance series because of the main character and just her growth throughout the series. So if you're unfamiliar with the Plated Prisoner series, we are following RN, and it is a King of Midas reimagining. So RN is the gilded pet of Midas, who has the power to turn anything he touches into gold. So he has gold-touched RN and leaves her in this gilded cage inside his palace, where all she really does is drink wine and just wants to please Midas. She has absolutely no autonomy, could care less about herself. She just wants to be safe and make Midas happy. Well, that is until she is forced to leave her gilded cage, and then things kind of progress from there. So I will say this first book, you will be so frustrated with the main character. Like, I DNF'd this first book about 3 or 4 times. However, once you get to book 3, it's a whole new ballgame, and you're gonna love RN so, so much, and the romance in this is excellent. So I really hope I get a chance to meet Raven Kennedy. And last up is Sarah A. Parker. And I keep saying I'm gonna finish the To Bleed a Crystal Bloom series, and I keep putting it off, but I am determined to read it before Apollycon because I know it's gonna be a 5-star read, and I feel like I'm gonna fangirl even harder when I meet her after I finished all the books. But if you're unfamiliar with To Bleed a Crystal Bloom, it is a very loose Rapunzel reimagining. We're following this girl, and she ends up being found by this guy who's a warden. And let me start over. There's a warden, and he is traversing through this wood, and he ends up seeing a massacre, and the only survivor of the massacre is this little girl. So he ends up taking this girl back to his house where he raises her in complete isolation, and all he asks from her is a drop of her blood every night. And the story goes from there. But what I have said to a lot of people about this book is we are really following and finding out about this world through the eyes of our main character, who is unbelievably naive. So we are trying to kind of puzzle out what is happening with her, and it's just such a unique story, and the writing is beautiful. There's so many twists and turns. I finished this book and still had no idea what was happening, but in a good way. I also know that When the Moon Hatched is by this author. It's also unbelievably popular. I'm waiting for the audiobook to be released because that writing is very, very lyrical, and I just feel like I need to follow along with the audio, but that is another very popular book by Sarah A. Parker. All right, guys, those are some of the fantasy romance authors I'm really looking forward to meeting at Apollycon. And like I said, this is a collab video, so please check out Lisa and Becky's videos that are linked down below. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to my Paladin protectors, Leslie, Amanda, and Erin. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!